The wind had a voice that morning, not loud, but old. It sighed through the brittle slats of the wooden buildings, like it had seen everything, and had no strength left to argue. The sky hung low over dry river crossing, pale as spilled milk, and the dirt road through town was dusted with a ghost-colored memory of horses long gone. She stood barefoot on the rough boards of the jailhouse porch, wrists bound in iron. Clara Whitmore, hair the shade of molasses pulled into a careless braid, cheeks hollowed by days without supper, and a stillness in her that made people nervous. Not the trembling kind. The sort that looked like stone had learned to breathe. They called her Trouble. Witch-born. Fire-fated. She had once been the town's gentle flower, daughter of a homesteader with hands like fiddle strings and eyes that laughed easily. But that was before the sickness took her mother, before the flames took their barn and left her father's body curled into ash beside the horses. She'd been 17 then, all cracked voice and soot-scabbed fingers, trying to hold together what no one offered to help fix. And when she fell behind on land dues, she made the mistake of asking Sheriff Barden for mercy. That was how he set his sights on her, a powerful man used to women folding under the pressure of his grin. But Clara had thanked him and walked away, dignity held like a thorn-pricked rose in her palm. He never forgave her for that. Now she waited for auction, the public sale of a human soul dressed in calico and shame. The sheriff called it repayment. The town called it unfortunate but legal. But Clara, she called it Tuesday. Another page in a story she hadn't agreed to write. The boy came again, Elias, no more than 10, with one sleeve shorter than the other, and a heart that hadn't yet learned to look away. He crept up like a whisper and held out a tin cup of water. She didn't speak, just knelt slightly and took it slow, her fingers brushing his for the briefest second. "They're saying someone from a Lakota camp is here," he whispered, glancing back at the hitch post where a painted pony now waited, dust on its hooves like frost. Clara looked, but the jail's bars made vision crooked. Still she saw him, a man alone. No posse, no fuss. Just leather-wrapped silence, and eyes that didn't flicker when people stared. He stood across the street, unmoving, as if he had always been there. "Wicasa." The sheriff's voice cut through the moment, like a blade scraping bone. "Back from the creek, girl? Good. You'll want to look presentable for your big day." Clara straightened without a word. That silence of hers, it was like thunder held in a teacup. Sheriff Barden was a broad man with a paunch fed on other people's misfortunes. He wore his badge like a weapon and smiled like a wolf too lazy to hide its teeth. He had once tried to court her with sweet corn and coin. Now he paraded her as debt made flesh. He lifted her chin with the butt of his rifle. "Think anyone will pay more than 2 bits for used goods like you?" She did not flinch. His smile soured. He turned to spit but paused, eyes narrowing toward the man beneath the awning of the mercantile. Wicasa hadn't moved, not even to blink. The sheriff's mouth twisted. Savages don't have pockets. The Lakota warrior did not answer, nor look away. By midday, the platform was near complete. 2 of the blacksmith's boys nailed down the last board while their father argued with the preacher about whether this counted as biblical restitution. No one asked Clara what she believed. They only warned her not to resist. "Think of it like marrying someone with paperwork," chuckled one of the deputies. She did not answer. That night, they locked her back into the holding room, a place once used for drunkards and dying coyotes. Clara traced shapes into the wooden wall with a fingernail. A sun, a bluebell, the curve of a horse's mane. Her father used to say that if you could draw it from memory, it still belonged to you. She heard a sound, a breath more than a footstep. At the corner of the cell window, the warrior's silhouette appeared, framed by stars and the restless shuffle of trees beyond town. He didn't speak. He simply placed something through the bars, a folded cloth, weathered but clean, and a small strip of dried meat. Then he vanished into the hush. Clara sat for a long time with the cloth in her lap. It smelled of smoke and pine sap, and the stitching was old, hand-done. There was nothing romantic about it. No gesture of heroism. Just quiet humanity freely given. She tucked it beneath her shoulder like a bomb. By morning, The wind had changed direction. The auction would begin at noon. The platform groaned under the weight of curious bodies. The banker, the blacksmith, the widows who once gave Clara sugar cubes in church. Sheriff Barton stood tall, boots polished and voice like tar. He read from a paper that rattled more than he did, spoke of debts and disorder, of fines unpaid and laws misunderstood. When he said her name, he paused, just enough to remind them she had once been lovely. Clara Whitmore. Auctioned by legal order of the Dry River Crossing Municipality. Starting bid $4. She stood straight. The sun behind her wove gold through the dust in her hair. She wore the cloth the warrior had given her, tied at her wrist like a ribbon of belonging. The crowd rustled. No one moved. Then, from the back, boots on the boardwalk. Slow, purposeful. Wakasa stepped forward. Not fast, not with fire. Just the way rivers do when they choose their path. Inevitable. The sheriff's hand hovered near his revolver. Don't be foolish. But the warrior kept walking. Clara didn't breathe. And just before he reached the edge of the crowd, he stopped. He said nothing. He didn't need to. He looked at her, not with pity, nor hunger, nor savior's pride, but like she was a name he had been carrying too long without a face. Clara's lips parted just slightly. Not from fear, from recognition. Somewhere in that space between her heartbeat and the hush of the crowd, something shifted. She was no longer alone. The sheriff broke the spell. "Get back," he barked. "This ain't your concern." But no one laughed with him. No one jeered. Even the preacher said nothing. And somewhere on the far edge of town, the chapel bell rang. Just once. A sound like a door unlocking. Clara looked at the crowd. Then at the man who had watched her not like a hawk, but a brother of the storm. And then, gently, she sat down at the edge of the platform, wrists still bound, but head held high. The auction had not ended, but something else had begun. And in the eyes of those who noticed, the wind no longer sounded tired. It sounded like a promise. The wind had carried his name longer than he had. Long before white tongues twisted it into syllables they could tolerate, he had simply been Wakasa, which in his grandmother's voice had meant more than warrior. It had meant listener, root holder, one who waits until the silence gives way. He had not come to Dry River Crossing for Clara Whitmore. Not at first. The whisper reached him through a merchant's caravan, a girl being auctioned like cattle, her debt sold like winter pelts. He did not believe it at first. White towns had many strange rituals, but this tasted of something older, crueler, something his people had once endured beneath iron stars and broken treaties. Still he came, not with fury, with eyes open. He watched from the woods that first night. The town breathed like a wounded animal, loud in its sleep, uneasy in its bones. He made no fire, slept beneath trees that remembered things men no longer spoke of. By dawn, he rode in like shadow, left his horse tied beneath the cottonwood near the mercantile. No badge, no weapon shown, just himself, quiet, unreadable, and wrapped in patience. The girl was thinner than rumor, not fragile, though. Her body looked as if it had been carved down by grief, not defeat. Her eyes were the color of prairie storms, and when she looked up, he saw not a plea, but a mirror. They did not speak. Not yet. Some truths don't require sound. He watched her as she drank the water from the boy, watched her give thanks without words. She moved like someone who had learned not to ask for kindness because it often came wrapped in cost. And yet, when the boy smiled at her, something in her softened. Barely. A thaw beneath snow. Wakasa turned before the sheriff stepped forward, not because he feared him, but because he knew poison when it came clothed in law. That evening, he sat near the edge of town, on the rise of a low hill. He carved lines into a strip of leather, not to pass time, to remember. His sister, Tanila, had once been bartered for grain. The men who called themselves righteous had claimed it was salvation. She had been 12. He never found her. That scar lived beneath his ribs, not angry, just unfinished. Clara reminded him of her, though not in the obvious ways. Tanila had been all firelight and laughter, curious even in chains. Clara was stone and thunder, still, unyielding. But something in their quiet, in the way they disappeared from the world around them, echoed the same music. That night, he returned to the jail and left the cloth and the meat. A gesture, not a rescue, of witness. She accepted it without protest. He did not return to the hill that time. Instead, he waited nearby, listened to the way the town spoke of her, some with venom, some with shame, but none with truth. The woman they described wicked, defiant, cursed, did not match the one who sat cross-legged in her cell, drawing wild flowers on the wood like they were spells to keep her heart from vanishing. The sheriff drank that night, loud, careless, bragged at the saloon that no one would dare outbid him, called her his property, laughing like a man who had never been told no and survived it. Wakasa didn't drink. He left the saloon before someone tested his silence. Morning came slow. The auction would be the next day. He walked the edges of town, found the preacher alone, sweeping dust from the chapel door. "You believe in mercy?" he asked. The preacher paused, squinted at him through sunlight. "Only if it costs something," he said. Wakasa nodded once and walked on. Later, he passed the innkeeper, the older woman with soft hands and tired shoulders. Mrs. Finch. She didn't flinch when she saw him. "You've been watching her," she said. He didn't deny it. "She used to hum while she swept my steps," the woman added. "Now she just listens for the next cruelty." He looked at the window above the inn. The curtain fluttered. No one behind it. "I think you see her," the woman said. "I think she sees me," he replied. That night, beneath a sky full of stories, he sat by the cottonwood again. He unwrapped the pipe, the one his father had smoked in council, the one passed through generations, never lit, without purpose, the one that was never traded, never given, unless the cause was sacred. He didn't know yet what he would do, but the air felt different, heavy, ready. He dreamed of rivers, of a girl standing in water, unchained, sunlight caught in her palms. When he woke, his jaw ached with the memory of his own stillness. Auction day. The crowd gathered early, buzzing like flies around meat. Most came not to buy, but to watch. A spectacle, tragedy softened by distance. Clara stood with her wrists bound, but her spine straight. That ribbon of cloth, his cloth, wrapped around her wrist like a vow. He stepped forward when the time came. The world narrowed to footsteps. Went beneath his boots, dust curling at his ankles, every eye on him like arrows. He walked until silence swallowed the square. Then he stopped. The sheriff's voice cracked first. A threat masked as law, but it rang hollow in the quiet. Wakasa said nothing. He did not need to. Clara looked at him then, truly looked. Not just the surface of him. The stories, the stillness, the cost. And she saw. She saw. In that gaze, there was no rescue, no romance, no firebrand rebellion. There was only this. Someone who did not look away. The sheriff stepped down from a platform, hand near his revolver. "You think she's yours now?" Wakasa's answer came not in speech, but movement. He reached into the satchel tied at his waist and pulled out the pipe. Not lit, not raised, just shown. Every elder in the town knew what it meant. The offering of a pipe was not barter. It was bond, sacred, binding. Not for gold, not for land, for life, for protection, for peace. The air went still. The sheriff faltered. Even the preacher stepped forward, voice thin. "This can't be refused. It would dishonor every treaty ever signed." The silence deepened. Clara exhaled once, the first sound she'd made that day. It was not a sob. It was not relief. It was the sound of something unbreaking. And then, gently, without being told, she stepped from a platform. The chains still bound her wrists, but her step was free. She walked until she stood beside him. Not behind, beside. He didn't reach for her. He didn't move. He just stood, a shadow with a spine, a witness with a soul. And she nodded. Only once. Then they turned together, and the crowd parted like wheat. Behind them, the sheriff stood still, teeth grinding on defeat he could not name. Clara did not look back. The chapel bell rang again. Just once. A sound like an answer. Ahead, the wind stirred the long grass, and in its breath was a question neither had yet spoken, not out loud. Where do we go now? But the wind already knew. Forward. The days that followed were hushed and half-lit, as though the sun itself had paused in the sky to see what would become of them. Clara did not ride behind him. She walked at first. Her ankles blistered in silence, but she did not complain. Wakasa never asked her to speak. He simply matched her pace, his painted pony walking beside them like a sentinel. Where she stumbled, he steadied, not with arms, but presence. There are rescues more powerful than touch. They made camp 3 nights out, under the bones of a cottonwood struck by lightning years before. The air smelled of sage and ash. Clara sat cross-legged by the fire, watching its light-stitched shadows across Wakasa's face. His expression did not soften or darken. It simply was, like stone smoothed by time. She finally asked what he was doing the day he stood before the crowd. He looked at the flames, then at the stars, and answered only, "Something my father would have done." She did not pry further. Something in the stillness between them did the talking. She did not feel owed an explanation. She was only trying to understand the shape of the man who had turned the wind that day. In her sleep, she dreamed of the auction platform burning, not as revenge, as cleansing. By the 5th day, they reached a narrow stream lined with willows. Wakasa showed her how to set snares, how to watch for movement beneath the brush. Clara was clumsy with it. Her hands remembered sewing, not survival. But she tried, and he noticed. When they caught their first rabbit, she held it with a stillness that echoed her own past, not grief, but reverence. She whispered a thank you to the creature before giving it over. Wakasa did not laugh, nor nod. He simply prepared it with the same gentleness. That night, she sat beside the fire with charcoal on her fingertips. She traced again the shape of a bluebell on a flat stone, just as she had scratched it into the cell wall days before. This time it was not a memory. It was a becoming. He watched her work, the faint curl of a smile tugging one corner of his mouth, but not rising. Some smiles live deeper than lips. "You draw to remember?" he asked. "I draw to know I'm still here." A pause. "I watch the wind for the same reason." They did not need more than that. The next day, they reached a Lakota outpost, small, respectful, wrapped in laughter and smoke. Women glanced at Clara, without surprise, only curiosity. A child ran to greet Wakasa, threw himself against the warrior's knees. Clara learned his name was Tawa, nephew, not son. The child stared at her, wide-eyed, then offered her a smooth stone. She took it. A gift, not a test. For 3 nights, she lived among those who did not speak her tongue, but somehow understood her silence. One woman, older than time, braided Clara's hair without permission or explanation, humming as she worked. When she was done, she placed a small shell against Clara's temple and whispered something that sounded like still water. Wakasa spoke little during those days. He carved, repaired leather, listened. He did not offer her to them, nor explain her presence. He simply made space for her to exist without interrogation. On the morning of the 4th day, word arrived on the wind, a rider breathless, carrying the stink of fear. Sheriff Barton was coming. Not alone. 2 bounty men rode with him. Legal men, armed with writs and disdain. Word had traveled fast. Clara had been taken, they said. Not rescued. Stolen. She stood still as ice when she heard. Her first thought wasn't fear. It was, of course, because cruelty rarely accepts its own ending. Wakasa did not pace or panic. He simply packed. "We can run," she said, voice low. "No," he said. "We move forward." "Then I'll fight," she whispered, surprised by herself. He paused, looked at her with a depth that almost undid her. "No," he said again gently. "You will be seen." He offered her a talisman. A narrow piece of polished bone wrapped in rawhide, feathers and small beads tied to its end. She held it as if it might burn, but it only hummed. "This is for strength," he said. "And what about fear?" "That too." She nodded, wore it close to her heart. They left the camp before sunrise. The air was thick with meaning, and even the birds held their songs. They followed no roads, just instinct and memory. By dusk, the edge of Dry River came into view once more, faint rooftops etched against a twilight sky. Clara's feet bled again, but she did not stop. The platform was still there, waiting like a ghost. Word had already returned ahead of them. The townsfolk watched from behind curtains, eyes flicking like moths. The preacher stood near the church, his collar loose. Mrs. Finch waited at the inn's edge, arms folded. Elias was not seen. Clara walked ahead of Wakasa. She wore no ribbon, no chains, no disguise. The sheriff arrived within the hour. Dust trailed behind his horse like smoke. His voice was the same as always, loud, slick, too practiced to feel real. "You'll come with me," he said. "She's property of this county. There's a law." Clara did not flinch. She stepped forward and placed the talisman into the dust between them. "She's not yours," said the preacher, surprising them all. Barden spun. "You stay out of this, old man." Mrs. Finch moved next. "She is no one's debt, and no longer yours to shame." The townspeople murmured. The crowd swelled. Something unseen moved through them, not revolution, but reckoning. Wakasa stepped to Clara's side. He did not raise his voice. He simply looked. "There are no chains," he said. "Not unless you bring them." Sheriff Barden hesitated. For the first time, he looked like a man who understood he had already lost. He turned his horse, spitting into the dust, but said nothing more. No gunfire, no blood, just the sound of hooves, fading. Clara stood there, the air thick with a kind of peace that tasted like smoke and salt. Her hands trembled once, then stilled. She did not cry. Wakasa handed her the talisman again. She tied it to her wrist. That night, the wind curled through town like a blessing. It carried no storm, no sand, no warning, only the soft scent of wood smoke, and the beginning of something neither of them could yet name. The dawn came slow, as if reluctant to wake the world. A thin veil of silver clung to the horizon, the kind of light that made everything look suspended, neither day nor night, just breath held. The town of Dry River Crossing sat hushed beneath it, shutters drawn and boots absent from the boardwalks, as if the ground itself had grown tired of carrying fear. Clara stood beneath the twisted bones of the cottonwood, facing the road that once led her in chains. She wore a dress the color of cream and dust, gifted by Mrs. Finch the night before, once stitched for a daughter who never came home. Her hair had been braided back by her own hands, slow and steady, like winding rope before a climb. The talisman rested against her collarbone, swinging slightly with each breath. She hadn't taken it off since Wakasa gave it to her. Not once. Today, there would be no auction, but there would be a reckoning. Sheriff Barden was returning, not with law behind him, that had failed, but with force and fury, and the kind of pride that could not bear to lose control. He would not come to talk. He would come to end the conversation. Clara knew this. She had felt it in the soil, in the way the birds had not sung that morning, in the stillness of the wind. Wakasa stood to her left, near enough to protect, far enough to honor. He had said little since they returned. He didn't need to. The strength he carried was no longer just his own. It was shared now, braided into the days they had lived quietly together, in snares and drawings and fire-watch silences. But today would ask more of them than silence. The crowd began to gather slowly, like the tide creeping back into a dry riverbed. Not jeering, not cruel, just watching, unsure, curious whether the old rules still held. Mrs. Finch came first, pressing a warm hand into Clara's. Then the preacher, spine straighter than before, eyes clear. One by one, the townspeople filled in, not shouting support, but showing up, and sometimes that's more powerful. Then the sound. Hoofbeats. Like hammers on the heart. 3 horses, thick with foam. Sheriff Barden rode at the front, his coat dark, his mouth twisted in a smile too wide to be real. Behind him, 2 bounty men, one with a rifle strapped across his back, the other scanning the crowd like he expected betrayal to look familiar. Clara didn't move. Her hands stayed folded in front of her. Her voice stayed silent. Wakasa stepped forward, not to block her, but to meet the gaze of the man who had tried to buy her, own her, destroy her. "This ends here," Barden called out, dismounting. "You bring her back now, and I'll forget what you've done." His boots struck the ground like threats. His words were meant to echo. They didn't. Clara stepped forward. "No," she said, and her voice was low but sharp as flint. "You don't get to write the end of me." Barden laughed, short and ugly. "You think standing next to one savage makes you free?" She turned her gaze to him, not fierce, but clear. Her strength was not in heat, but in the calm of someone who had already burned. "I was never yours," she said. "Not when you made the deal. Not when you dragged me in front of them. Not now." He moved his hand toward his hip, not fast enough to be brave, not slow enough to be harmless. The preacher stepped forward. "There are no chains here," he said, voice like gravel and gospel. Barden froze. And then the rifleman twitched. Just enough. But Wakasa was already moving. Not wild. Not loud. Like lightning without thunder. His hand met the rifle barrel before the man could aim. A twist, a blow. The gun clattered to the dirt. The second bounty hunter reached for his pistol, but found it taken from his holster by Elias, who had crept up unseen from the alley, small and sure. The boy held it high, hands shaking, eyes wet but burning. "Leave her be," he shouted. "You leave her be." The wind stopped then, completely, as if the world needed to witness what came next in stillness. Barden looked around, saw no allies, saw no fear in the eyes he had once commanded. He saw Clara, her head high, her soul unhidden, and he understood, too late, that she had never been his to hurt. His lip curled. "She's marked. You all see it. She's cursed." The old woman who had braided Clara's hair stepped from the crowd. "She is not cursed," she said. "She is chosen." Barden backed toward his horse. "I'll be back," he said, but the threat hung hollow. No one believed him anymore. Not even his men. He mounted, turned, rode out. No one followed. The moment held, suspended in breath. Then Clara exhaled. Wakasa turned to her, eyes searching. She nodded once. "I am not afraid." He said nothing. He only placed his hand over her heart, just once, and stepped back. The townspeople did not cheer. They did not weep. They simply stood with her. That night, the chapel bell rang again. But not for judgment. For freedom. Wakasa and Clara walked past the auction block for the last time. Its wood was splintering. Now, the platform cracked. It would not stand another season. She did not look back. They left Dry River crossing beneath stars that blinked like soft lanterns in the sky. No path. No plan. Just forward. At the edge of the prairie, the wind picked up again. Not wild. Not cold. Just a quiet voice, steady and warm. And if you had been standing there, just beside them, you might have heard it say, "The story doesn't end here. It begins."